All right, ready for a deep dive today? We're jumping into the world of ECGs, those heart tracking graphs. We'll be using How to Read an ECG by Dr. DrBarai, kind of like our own little med school refresher course, but way more relaxed.
That's right. Think of it as deciphering those squiggly lines without the exam stress.
Because, let's be honest, who hasn't looked at an ECG and thought, this looks more like a secret code than a health report?
And just like any good code, there's a key to understanding it. Think of the ECG as a map of your heart's electrical activity.
A map. Okay, I'm listening.
Every map needs a standard scale and orientation, right? That's where calibration comes in. Dr. Barai stresses how important it is that every ECG machine is speaking the same language, so to speak.
So no matter where you go, the ECG is telling the same story. No lost in translation issues.
Precisely, because a misplaced landmark on a mat can throw you off course, right? Well, a miscalibrated ECG, that could lead to a misdiagnosis, and we definitely don't want that.
Okay, so standardized map check. What are the landmarks we're looking for on this cardiac map?
Think about it. Each heartbeat has a rhythm, a sequence of events. Each of those events, from the atria contracting to the ventricles relaxing, creates a blip on the ECG. Those are our landmarks.
So those aren't just random squiggles. Each one means something specific is happening in the heart.
Right. Now imagine you're holding an ECG printout. What's the first thing you see? Probably those little bumps, those curves.
Yeah, like little waves, some bigger, some smaller.
Exactly. Each one tells a part of the story. That small bump at the beginning, that's the P wave. Don't let its size fool you. It's the atria contracting, pushing blood down into the ventricles, like the first domino setting the whole heartbeat in motion.
The atria are saying, time to get to work.
Exactly. Then comes the big one, the QRS complex. This is the ventricles contracting, pushing blood out to the body.
So that's the heart flexing, showing its power.
You got it. And that final wave, the T wave, that's everything calming down, the ventricles relaxing and refilling. It's like the heart catching its breath after a good workout.
Okay, so we've got P wave, atria contract, QRS complex, ventricles contract, T wave, everybody relax. Straightforward so far.
Hold on. We can't forget those little spaces between the waves. Those are important too. The PR interval, the ST segment.
Oh, right. Those quiet moments. What makes those important?
Think of them as the behind-the-scenes crew. They might not be the main act, but they're crucial for the show to go on. They reveal how efficiently those electrical signals are moving through your heart.
So it's like measuring how well the heart is talking to itself, making sure the messages are getting through?
You could say that. Take the PR interval, for example. It's like a measurement of the time it takes for the signal to travel from the atria to those ventricles.
So if it takes too long, something might be slowing it down.
Exactly. It could be a sign of a conduction problem, like a roadblock in the heart's electrical system. And then there's the ST segment. That one's a bit of a drama queen.
Drama queen. How so?
It likes to stay flat, nice and even. If it gets too high or too low, it's usually trying to get our attention.
Like a little warning flag.
More like a flashing neon sign. ST elevation, for example, often points to acute injury to the heart muscle.
During a heart attack.
Exactly. It's the heart's way of shouting, hey, something's wrong here. That's why knowing how to spot these little changes on the ECG can be so important. It can be life-saving, really.
Okay, so every squiggle, every segment, it all tells a part of the story. It's pretty incredible when you think about it.
It really is. And just like with any good story, it's not enough to just know the characters. We've got to understand how they all interact.
So understanding those individual components is just the first step. What comes next in our ECG adventure? So we've got the pieces, but how do we figure out how fast or slow the heart is ticking from those squiggles? How do we measure the heart's speed?
That's where heart rate comes in. It's one of the first things we look at. Dr. Barai talks about a few ways to calculate it, but let's keep it simple, yeah. See those big squares on the ECG printout? The ones with the thicker lines?
Yeah, like a grid, right?
Exactly. Each of those squares represents a specific amount of time, like a ruler for your heart's rhythm.
Okay, a rhythm ruler. I like it.
So if the rhythm is regular, those R waves are all nicely spaced out, we can just count the number of big squares between two R waves, do a quick calculation, and boom, you've got the heart rate.
So like, if there are 4 big squares between those peaks, what, we divide something?
300 divided by the number of squares. In your example, 300 divided by 4 gives us 75 beats per minute.
See, math isn't so bad. But what about when those R waves are all over the place, not so nicely spaced?
Ah, you're talking about irregular rhythms. For that, Dr. Barai talks about using a rhythm strip, a little 10-second snippet of the ECG. We can count the QRS complexes in that strip, multiply by 6, and get an average heart rate for a minute.
Clever. So we're taking a sample and figuring out the bigger picture. And what about that paper test thing DrBarai mentions, marking the R waves on a separate piece of paper?
Exactly. It's a really neat way to visually see how regular or irregular the rhythm is. You basically make your own little rhythm ruler, line it up with the ECG paper, and see if those beats are marching to the same drummer or doing their own thing.
I'm all about those visual aids. But we've talked about the speed. What about the direction? Those electrical signals, they're not just going up and down, are they?
You're onto something. You're thinking about the heart's electrical axis. Now we're getting into the spatial aspect, like figuring out directions on a map.
So we're busting out the compass now. If my heart's a compass, which way is north?
I love that analogy. Imagine your heart like a clock face, a normal axis point somewhere between 11 o'clock and 5 o'clock.
Okay, so if it's pointing at, say, 2 o'clock, we're good. But what if it's way off, like pointing towards 8 o'clock? That's not good.
Right. That's when we put our detective hats on. Deviations from that normal axis can tell us about the heart's structure, maybe even hint at an underlying condition. Say, a right axis deviation, where the signal is pointing more towards 3 o'clock. That could mean the right ventricle, the lower right chamber, is enlarged.
Enlarged. Why would that happen?
Could be a number of things. Could be lung disease, anything that makes that right ventricle work harder to pump blood.
Wow. The electrical activity can actually tell us about the heart's physical condition. That's amazing.
Right. And it's all thanks to those electrodes, strategically placed to capture the electrical activity from all angles. It's not just about the rhythm. It's about the heart's position, any potential structural hiccups it might have.
Okay, so we've got a handle on the basics, reading the rhythm, even figuring out the heart's compass. Now, time for the real detective work. Finding those clues that tell us something might be off. What should we be looking out for?
You got it. Time to put on those magnifying glasses. Remember those waves and segments. Well, any significant deviation from the norm can be a clue. One thing we look for are pathological Q waves.
Pathological Q waves, those sound a little scary.
They can be. Those little dips at the beginning of the QRS complex, if they're unusually deep or wide, it could be a sign of a previous heart attack.
A scar, almost, like the heart's electrical system is remembering past damage.
Exactly. It means the heart muscle in that area might not be conducting electricity as smoothly as it should. Then there's the QRS complex itself. If it's wider than usual, it can indicate a bundle branch block. Imagine those electrical signals traveling down specific pathways to the ventricles.
It's like a highway for those signals.
Exactly. A bundle branch block is like a detour on that highway, slowing down the signal.
So instead of a smooth ride, it's a bit of a bumpy road.
Exactly. Might not always be serious, but definitely something to check out further. And of course, we can't forget those ST segments, the drama queens we talked about. DrBarai emphasizes these ST elevations and depressions as particularly important.
Right, those were the warning flags.
Exactly. ST elevation often means there's an acute injury, like during a heart attack.
So that's a 911 situation, right?
Absolutely. Every second counts with a heart attack. Recognizing that ST elevation is crucial.
And what about when it dips low, ST depression? Is that as bad?
It can be. ST depression often means a part of the heart isn't getting enough blood, what we call ischemia. Could be a sign of coronary artery disease.
So whether it's up high or down low, that ST segment, any change from the norm needs a closer look. It's like the heart's own little alarm system.
Love that analogy. And it highlights just how important it is to be able to see these subtle changes. We're basically heart detectives piecing together the clues to understand what's really going on.
Absolutely. It's like a medical mystery, only this time it's the heart telling the story.
It is. But sometimes, like in those really good mystery novels, there's a twist.
A twist? You mean like a false clue, something that looks bad but isn't?
Exactly. DrBarai talks about this thing called high takeoff or benign early repolarization.
Benign sounds good, but high takeoff sounds a little scary. What is that exactly?
It's all about that ST segment again. With high takeoff, the ST segment it rises a bit early, so it looks like it's elevated, like a red flag, but it's actually just normal, a variation.
A false alarm then, basically, tricking us with ECG.
Exactly. And it can be tough to tell the difference, between that and true ST elevation, which is a big deal, of course.
So how do we avoid freaking out over nothing? What's the key to figuring out if it's a harmless quirk or something serious?
We got to play detective, look at the whole case file, the patient's age, what symptoms they're having, their medical history, all the clues. Benign early repolarization, this high takeoff thing, it usually happens in younger, healthy folks, and it often shows up in multiple leads, specific patterns. But even with all that, it's essential to consider everything. not just what the ECG is saying.
Right, so you're not just reading a graph, you're reading a person.
Yeah.
Putting all the pieces together.
Exactly. The ECG, it's a powerful tool, no doubt, but it's just one tool in the kit. We got to combine those electrical signals with the whole patient story to really understand what's going on.
It's incredible how much information is packed into those little lines, those squiggles. But it's also kind of reassuring that it's not just about memorizing patterns. It's about judgment, context, the whole picture.
Absolutely. Speaking of memorizing, though, are you ready for some ECG mnemonics? DrBarai mentions a few that are really helpful, actually.
Mnemonics, I'm all about those memory tricks. Lay it on me.
Right, remember those bundle branch blocks we talked about? Left versus right?
Yeah, those highway detours for the electrical signals.
Right, so DrBarai uses William Morrow to tell them apart.
William Morrow. Okay, I've got it. But how does that help?
Focus on those middle letters. William, 2 L's, right? That's for a left bundle branch block. And Marrow, double R, that's for a right bundle branch block. It's all about the shape of the QRS complex, those peaks and dips in leads V1 and V6.
Okay, so if the QRS looks like a WV1 and M in V6, we're thinking William, left bundle branch block, and vice versa, M in V1, W in V6, it's Marrow, right bundle branch block. I actually might remember that.
See, ECGs can be fun. And these mnemonics, they can really make a difference when you're trying to recall all this stuff, especially under pressure.
Absolutely. Like having a cheat sheet for the heart's electrical language.
Exactly. And since we're on the topic of deciphering, let's talk about heart blocks. DrBarai uses a great analogy thinking about the electrical signals like a train.
Okay, I'm picturing a train chugging along. What's a first-degree heart block in this scenario?
Imagine the train hitting a yellow light. A slight delay, but it still goes through. That's like a first-degree block. A little delay in the signal between the atria and ventricles.
The signal is a bit sluggish, but it gets there eventually.
Exactly. Now, second degree, that's where it gets interesting. Type 1, what we call Lenkebach, is like, imagine that train conductor is getting more and more tired at each stop. So the time between stations, that's like the PR interval, gets longer and longer until, whoops, a train gets totally missed.
So the signal's getting weaker, like it just can't quite make it through.
Precisely. Type 2 second degree block, on the other hand, that's more like a faulty switch on the tracks. PR interval stays the same, but every now and then, bam, a train gets blocked. Unpredictable.
Okay, type 1 is the sleepy conductor, type 2 is that faulty switch. Got it. What about third degree, the most serious one? What happens to our train then?
That's a complete blockage on the tracks. No trains are getting through. The atria and ventricles, they're basically doing their own thing. No communication.
No communication, that sounds bad.
It can be. Third degree heart block, that needs attention right away. The heart might not be pumping as effectively as it should.
Wow. Okay, so we've learned a lot today. Gone from those mysterious squiggles to identifying the key players, figuring out the heart's rhythm, even spotting those little red flags.
We even learned about William Morrow and his train adventures.
Exactly. But I think the biggest takeaway here is that the ECG, it's amazing, but it's not the whole story. It's one piece of the puzzle, and we have to use our knowledge, our judgment, to put it all together.
Couldn't have said it better myself. The ECG gives us this incredible glimpse into the heart's electrical life, but it means the most when we see it as part of the whole person, their whole story.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. Next time you see an ECG, don't be intimidating. Instead of those squiggles, see those clues, those little insights into this incredible rhythm that keeps us all going. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.